Good morning, Grid Connections listeners. In today's episode, we have a special guest joining us, Jonny Lieberman, co-host of the InEVitable podcast and senior features editor at MotorTrend. We'll be diving deep into the current automotive market along with challenges of transitioning to electric vehicles, exploring the current state of EV charging infrastructure, and discussing the overall impact of software-defined vehicles for car owners. This episode is packed with insights and expert perspectives that you won't want to miss. After you listen, please share this episode with at least one other person who would enjoy it and leave a positive review on our podcast page. Your support helps us continue to bring you top-notch content. With that, enjoy. I'm really excited for today's episode. I'm joined by Jonny Lieberman. He is the co-host of the InEVitable podcast. I'm sure quite a few are already listening to it, but for those unfamiliar, it's a great podcast looking at the essentially automotive and the transition it's going through for electric vehicles and electric supporting technology. Obviously, you've been working at MotorTrend and other places for quite a while, Jonny, but just in case anyone isn't familiar, you can just give a quick little overview of your background.
Sure. Hi there. I'm Jonny Lieberman. I am the senior features editor, and I'm one of two senior features editor at MotorTrend. Kristen Lee's the other one. I've been at MotorTrend for almost it'll be 14 years next month.
Congrats. Wow.
Yeah, time's flying. I've been making money writing and talking about cars for 19 years. Somehow, don't ask. It's
living the dream.
I would say stay in school, kids. Yeah, I mean, I never thought I would be some EV advocate or anything like that. I like everybody else, I think I got into this business because I wanted to drive Lamborghinis really fast, and I've done that. Suddenly I remember, like it was yesterday, back in November of 2012, this thing called the Tesla Model S showed up, and wow, if it would have been gasoline powered, we would have really liked it. It was a really good car. And then, you start learning about them and boy, they make a lot of sense. And then you kind of if you understand, I guess, the scientific method, you're like, boy, dumping all the CO2 that's buried in the earth into the atmosphere is going to have dire consequences, not for the planet. The planet, hey, dinosaurs got wiped out. The planet was just fine. It's going to have dire consequences for my children and your children and your children's children and future generations. Boy, if there was a way to curtail that and have really good vehicles at the same time, that's win-win. And then you started seeing stuff like Rivians and Lucids, and to me, it's like game on. These are better than regular trucks. This is a better sedan than a regular sedan, and a lot of that's largely because it's a software-defined vehicle with a big battery that can do a lot of amazing things. And do I still love gas cars? Yeah, God, yeah. I just bought one, so I'm a hypocrite as well. But I'm doing my best. And I'm very. And look, the automotive industry is going through the biggest transition since we got off steam, or got off horses, and so it's fascinating to be a witness to it and to talk about it and get to talk about it. So that's my my intro. I'm also on a podcast with Jerry Seinfeld at times called Spike's Car Radio with this guy Spike Ferriston, this guy Zuckerman. It's pretty funny. So dabble in comedy, although it's ostensibly about cars.
So comedy is the hobby, and then cars is
I guess. I don't know. I
have no idea
how on this podcast. It's really weird. Anyways, yes.
I'm glad you.
With Jerry Seinfeld at Pebble Beach again. So
I was going to say I just saw the kind of promotion for that, so I'm definitely looking forward to great work on it.
It's a weird life, man. It's a weird life.
Well, I think let's just take a couple steps back real quick with just your background for those kind of listening. So, how did you originally? You say you've been doing this for like 19 years now. And I see all those guitars behind you. I get the feeling that writing for kind of car reviews and being in that space probably wasn't the first job. What kind of led to getting into that space? And then I would love to
I've
learn
told
more
the story
about
a lot, and it's a little bit of apocrypha at this point. But true story, I turned 30, and I was a webmaster at an art school, and I was so bored. I couldn't even figure out a way to goof off, and I got to work at 9 a.m. and there was just nothing. I reached the end of the internet. And I couldn't even screw around. That was it. And this voice or this notion hit me and was like, hey, if you don't get up out of this chair right now and do something else, you're going to turn 40 and another decade of your one and only life is gone and you've just wasted it. And I don't know why I had that realization. I don't know what, but I immediately that day reached out. There was a website called The Truth About Cars, which at the time was a one-man gig. It was this guy, Robert Farrago. And he was like, we used to work for CNN or something. And he was a very good writer. And he was just doing, I really liked his reviews. And I wrote him and said, hey, are you hiring? And he said, go get a car and review it and we'll see, and I did. And after a little back and forth, he was like, all right, great. I'll send you a press car. And the rest is sort of history. And then I worked really hard. I made no money. And then 5 years later, MotorTrend came knocking and Angus McKenzie said, hey, what do you think? Senior editor, MotorTrend? I said, let me get married first, but the answer is probably yes. And a couple months, 2 months after I got married, I started working for MotorTrend, and it's next month, it's 14 years. So turned into a little bit of a career.
Wow. And I think that's great to hear, because it is such a important thing to kind of find what you're passionate about and to have those realizations about investing the time.
And we've all heard the cliche, find something you love. I'm kind of curious. It'll never feel like a day of work. Total lie. It's always work. I mean, I was grinding to get something. Like Fisker went bankrupt today, and I was like, I should probably comment on it. And boy, I didn't want to write that. And misery. But anyways, I'm fascinated by the subject matter. And again, I think what's really cool, rather than only the way it used to be, is only writing about, okay, here's the new X. It gets 10 more horsepower.
It's incrementally better. It's
10 millimeters lower. And right. The tire inflation sticker has been moved down 2 millimeters, and the center of gravity is now. But it's like, hey, this thing, it's got 4 motors and it can do anything. It's wild. And so it's kind of like, I don't know. I've been using the metaphor that we're at the end of the World Series for internal combustion. We kind of get it. There's a new Bugatti V16 that's coming. That'll be pretty cool. Corvette Z06, most powerful, naturally aspirated V8 ever, 670 horsepower. By the way, the Lucid Sapphire, it's got 3 670 horsepower motors on board. So it's like, it's just, we're in the first inning, maybe top of the second or something, of the electric car revolution. And I think what's going to start happening is going to really impress people. But yes, there's a hump, a transitory period we have to get over. But, I haven't written it yet, but I have the headline. It's the shifting goalposts of the electrification of the automobile. And I was looking back.
That's pretty spot on. That's a great title.
Thank you. Don't steal it. And I was I was looking at a Car and Driver from 2004, and you open it up, and Chubba's letter to the editor or whatever, the editor's note is like, hybrids suck. Page 2, Brock Yates. Hybrids are a commie plot to take away your rights. Page 3, mathematical proof from Patrick Bedard. And I hate to call these guys out by name, but I'm just going to. Nuking Hiroshima was better for the environment than 2 Priuses. Here's the math. Yeah. And now, man, I don't want EVs. I want a hybrid. Give me a plug-in hybrid. Like that's what real enthusiasts want. So it just moves around. And
why do you think that is? Is it just kind of like the as they say, like, you can take the V out of my cold dead hands kind of like mentality, or what? Yeah. What is?
I watched Red Dawn the other night. Speaking of nukes and things coming out of cold dead hands, and John Milius, I'm like, what a great movie. But yeah, America, we're an extreme country. We're in this like hyper polarized state. Yeah, look, we've probably been hyper polarized since before the Civil War, probably since the founding. Who knows how they pulled it off? So somehow, if you're on this side of the aisle, you hate EVs, and somehow if you're on this side, you love EVs. And I'm just like, I just love cars. And the continued possibility of human life on planet Earth. So I'm advocating for these things. And I think a lot of people take their eyes off that prize when it's just like, it's the CO2, stupid. Yes, I think EVs and good software, we can get better vehicles, and like it's not there yet for supercars. Although I've driven the Pininfarina Battista, and like, my God, that's good. But
It's a beautiful car
you
too.
know, you look at the Rivian R1T, and I am an owner, proud owner, and I pay them every month. I wish they would pay me, but I stupidly pay them every month because I bought the damn thing. It's better than any other truck. It's just better. I'm sorry. And happens to be an EV. You could say that way, or you could say it was really smart, and they used the fact that it has four motors. They're able to do things that no gasoline vehicle could do. Um, you know, in terms of like knowing what surface it's on, because you're sending X amount of power to the motor and it gets that much rotation. And if you send X and get Y, that means grass, or that means a rock, or
Right.
that means gravel. You can't do that, you know, because you got slip and gears and
You have
differentials.
such a delay
Yeah.
in so many of the different parts. But I'm kind of curious.
Yeah.
It is really interesting. Uh, like you said, like there's so much division and kind of this tribal, at
Mm-hmm.
least online. And I'm
Yeah.
always like consistent. I've
Yes.
done quite a few road trips. I've got a buddy actually of all things. He moved out from Oregon a couple years ago, and he lives now in the Midwest selling Volvo semi trucks. And so he is always like the best person to talk about, just like to get the heartbeat of what is going on in the central, like just in kind of the Midwest in general, but also like, especially like the trucking community that has so many, and admittedly like needs like you have to have for
Mm-hmm.
like a diesel truck. And so the skepticism around like hydrogen and electric vehicles, but it is really interesting to me that, as you're talking about like the goalpost moving,
Yeah.
what really always seems to even bring down the tribalism is just getting butts in seats, even though it's kind
Oh
of like
yeah.
been said forever. And just how quickly that, like, if you're going to have a much more fun car with way better features, it's like you don't really care what part of the political spectrum it's on, especially when you're dealing with the day to day. And I really feel like even then, there's maybe some traditional car enthusiasts that are, I think, yelling it the loudest, at least
Mm-hmm.
in some of the forums. But even then, I just feel like the best thing is always like, and it sounds like that's even how your experience was too. You kind of got behind the wheel of it. And even if you just forget that it's electric, the experience of it was just so much better than what's out there.
Yeah.
And
Yes, and to your point, yeah, butts and seats is a huge thing. And the other thing is like truckers, long haul truckers, like no more gears.
for
Really?
sure.
Like, that's great. You know, like maybe it could drive for you. Wow, even better. You know, like so yeah. You know,
Well, and especially with, I mean, I'm talking about passenger vehicles, but you're right. Like once you start getting into the commercial side, especially, we had one of the kind of early product managers for Daimler's. The trucking side is it's wild every time a truck has to start and stop, and just how much. I'm trying to blank. But the actual force on the frame and the amount of torque that a diesel engine puts on one of these vehicles day to day, especially when you're driving through like stop and go traffic, that with an electric or even a hydrogen vehicle, that just is not even a thought anymore. And
right.
it just
Yeah.
seems to be like so many of these things when it comes to the practicality and the living with it day to day that really makes the difference in whether you have that skepticism or you're just generally curious, that people are kind of jumping to the other side, or at
Yeah.
least considering it when they're going to
Yeah,
buy a vehicle.
it's like I hate to even like make it a side thing, but you know, like, look, a couple things. Like one, Bob Lutz has one of my favorite quotes was Americans buy horsepower but drive torque. So the way we drive, which is like, you know, jack rabbiting away
Yeah,
from stoplights, like EVs are better for that.
for
You
sure.
know, and having, you know, no gears to downshift, like that's even quicker. It's great. And but then, you know, the other thing is like there shouldn't be a side. It's you know
For sure.
it's this false narrative almost. I think the people you keep saying in the forums, the people yelling loudest are sort of the people that don't buy new cars anyways. And if you were to back
Right.
up a little bit, if you were to back up a little bit, what you'd find is these are the same people that are like power windows. Ugh, that's the government telling you you can't roll up and down. You got to use a computer to roll your. And I
That's
used
going
to
to break
talk to
down. It's going to be so expensive.
yeah,
Yada,
and so
yada,
it's
yada.
I think a
Yep.
lot of people that don't buy new cars are driving the narrative. People that buy new cars are like, oh
For
wait a
sure.
second, like this thing can like drive for me and stop and go traffic. Like I'd like that. I never have to go to a gas station, like because 99% of the time I just go to work, man. I want to come home, and last thing I want to do is like get up early to go get gas, or after a long hard day, stop at a gas. I can just go home and plug it in. Oh, that sounds heavenly. So it's I don't know, the loud ones. They're not really building EVs for you. You're driving a 50-year-old car. It's don't worry about it. No one's taking it away, but like don't try to impede progress. If that
For
makes
sure.
sense.
And I'm kind of, yeah, well, and I'm kind of curious. Like, you look at some of the brands, and globally, when you talk about like electric vehicles, and as you mentioned, hybrids, it's just like it seems like electric vehicles are getting better faster,
Oh yeah.
and just offer a much better experience all around than hybrids. And I was in the new Prius and a couple other things recently that are big improvements for them. But if you look at kind of like what the step function is compared to how far electric vehicles are like coming out with each year,
Yeah,
I'm
look, the Volt when it came out, went like, I don't know, 40 miles on a charge, and then it got 106 miles per gallon equivalent. The Prius Prime, 14 years later, goes 40 miles on a charge and gets
right.
106 miles per gallon. But the Prime's a great example of what I don't like about plug-in hybrids is, like, I was driving it around, I'm like, boy, this is a really nice EV. And then 36 miles later, the battery goes dead, and the most miserable 2-liter NA Atkinson cycle engine hooked to a CVT turns on. I'm like, oh, who wants this? It's a miserable driving experience. I think like plug-in hybrids kind of give you the worst of both worlds. You get a bad EV experience and
I
the
completely agree.
most miserable gasoline experience. And yes, you'll have people, oh no, you don't understand my life. For me, this is ideal. And it's like, I would say, look, plug-in hybrids and hybrids are supposed to be this transitory step between gasoline and EVs. Fine, except that EVs are outselling plug-in hybrids. So if the end of the bridge is doing better
Yeah.
than the bridge, like, burn the bridge. You don't need it.
Yeah.
So that's what I think.
I
But
mean, it's just like, even from like the engineering perspective of it, just like the amount of
yeah,
you're using this. It's a different chemistry, admittedly, but these small batteries that are having a much higher cycle life. You've got a
and it's not always
gas
a
engine.
different chemistry. If you look
That's
at
true.
like Audi's
Yeah.
plug-in hybrids, it's a 16.7 kilowatt battery. That's a lithium-ion battery.
Yeah, lithium ion.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, and yeah, I don't know anything about engineering, but look at Occam's razor. Like why would two powertrains? That's crazy. That's heavy and
I think
bad.
mechanics are going to love it longer term.
Yeah,
I don't
sure.
know if,
Yeah,
yeah,
more to go wrong. Yeah. Replace your
exactly.
battery and your transmission. Woo!
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Now,
So
start doing those affirm loans you see all over the place now,
yeah,
just
yeah,
for.
yeah.
But
Right.
when you kind of look at what these changes have been, there's obviously the drivetrain. I think that gets a lot of the attention, but I think that's really interesting that you guys have really focused on the InEVitable podcast, is then the software side of it and that
Yep.
user experience. And that really does kind of make it a night and day difference.
Look,
And I think there's an element where people say like, oh, that's just kind of like, it's nothing new. It's what, like you're saying, power windows or just a new version of something they can charge you. But I think there is a stair step function with having an EV and that kind of charge at home functionality and being able to do that with an app that's reliable. But then, yeah, you get like dog mode. You get all these other things that you really just couldn't do with a combustion engine
yeah,
vehicle.
it's so we use the term software defined vehicle, SDVs, and yeah, that's the game changer. And Tesla stumbled upon it. They remember when they were trying to get the Model S out the door, nobody would work with them. Nobody would give them parts. They're like, hey, we'd like some I don't know, window motors. Nope.
Yeah.
So they had to like make their own. And so like why the way traditional cars work is like your window motors come in from Bosch, and your
All the supplier and supply chain.
and
Yeah.
your graphics card comes in from Nvidia, and this comes in from another
That wasn't
manufacturer.
even a thing only a few years ago.
Well,
The
everyone's
fact,
got a screen, but
exactly.
yeah, but like
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
your engine control system comes from Johnson Controls. They all
Right.
speak different languages, and then you got to make it. So Tesla was like, well, just make everything speak the same language natively. Oh, now you control your software stack. So why did Fisker go bankrupt? Um, you know, it was because they didn't control their software stack. That was the hard
Right.
part, was that they were just trying to make, because they tried to do it in a cheaper way. It's like, okay, we're going to get suppliers to give us what we need, and we'll have somebody else build it. We'll have another factory build it. And they just never got control of their software stack. And that was, you go back and watch that, whatever his name was, video. I can't think of his name, but where this is the worst car I ever drove. He was just talking about the software. Hardware is fine. So you look at Tesla and you look at Rivian, and like their software is incredible. Especially, I would say these days, Rivian, like just murdering the software game. And go back and look at phones before the iPhone. Remember how many of those there were? Like once the iPhone showed up, game over. Guess what the iPhone is? Software controlled or software defined phone. You had an operating system that can, you had some really good hardware, but the software was able to take advantage of it. And it's funny what we're able to do with our phones now. But there was a time when you couldn't do anything, and you couldn't have a speedometer on your phone because you didn't have an accelerometer built in. So
usually the worst part of the modern phone now is the actual phone. It's like so many of these other things that it's unlocked in the use cases around them. But I think it's kind of funny because you're right. I actually had interviewed Henrik Fisker for Autoline a couple of years ago now. But it was really interesting talking with him. I mean, obviously, amazing history of designing cars and some beautiful vehicles he's made. But it just seemed like the whole business model, even back then to me, was like, okay, I get this from like an MBA business thesis. It's like, oh, this sounds like a great way to build a car. It just doesn't seem like, I mean, and you look at the startups that have been successful, Tesla, Rivian, and to some extent too, Lucid, at least with the brand recognition, it's that personalization, not just even in the software level, but in kind of just like creature comforts and some of these things that they built into those vehicles. And I think the Fisker Ocean was designed really beautifully, but in a day-to-day living practicality, and then obviously the software level of it, you just don't have that kind of connection to the actual driver that has made these other startups so successful.
But again, like, I think back on the, if I'm at Rivian almost 2 years now. Has it almost 2 years? 2 years? Yeah, it might be 2 years now. I can't remember. God, 2 years, I think. Anyhow, sorry. But like, I knew how good it was off-road when I bought it because I did a lot of off-roading with it. I knew it'd be really fast because it has 835 horsepower. But what's really impressed me about owning it is 2 years later, the car is much better than when I bought it.
Oh, for sure.
That doesn't happen. Well, I went to bed one night and I had 270 miles of range with the off-road tires. I woke up, I had 285. I got pet mode. I got camping mode. They totally, completely reconfigured all the major controls because it's software defined. They're able to, and they have good programmers. They, you know what I mean? You can have bad software defined vehicles. Rivian just happens to make a really good one. So it's just everything.
No, I mean, I think that is that's a really good point. It's just that you get used to that kind of user experience. Owning the vehicle. It's like, so if you go to look for another vehicle, it's like, well, it doesn't get software updates, or it's the same with like your phone. My iPhone's like 3 years old, but I still get updates and get support as these new features come out. And it's like our daily is just a Tesla Model Y, and it's the same thing.
Tesla Model Y is great. There's nothing wrong with it. Maybe it's a little ubiquitous these days, but it's a wonderful.
That's almost the downside, but almost kind of the nice thing. You kind of just blend in. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I remember we did a thing where we were doing an Ioniq 5 versus a Model Y. It was a white Model Y in LA, and like I would forget who I was following. I'm looking for the car. He's right in front of me. It's my friend Scott driving, but I would like, oh, where'd he go? Because it's just another white Model Y. But yeah, I mean, again, there's so much you can do. Like, again, another new feature that just came out with the Rivian, they're grading chargers. In other words, all the chargers in America, another person from Rivian is probably charged there, and it gives them a grade. And what is the grade? Well, I forget the exact formula, but it's like, is it up? What's the speed? How long did it take to start? Because if you have an EV, you've been to Electrify America, and it's taking you 25 minutes after being on the phone with some poor schlub who has to answer your screaming phone call. So like it takes all into account. That's an A charging site. That's a C. And like you're on a road trip, I'm going to go to the A. It's brilliant. But that just showed up like 2 months ago.
I know they had talked about actually doing a similar thing for Tesla in Europe because the traditional fast charging network had been much more reliable there. I'm not sure if they're still going to implement that here. But it's totally there. It is interesting because there clearly has also been an improvement recently in public fast charging.
There has been, and you
have
have to be in the game to notice it. But yeah, it's gotten a lot better.
Right, that's the other thing too. But you're totally right. I mean, my whole thing has always been with EVs, and especially fast charging, is it has to be at least. I mean, this is true with any technology. A new technology has to be not just as good, but better than the technology it's replacing for it to take off. Yep. And that's kind of where the supercharger thing, you got the experience, you plug in, you walk away. And obviously you got plug and charge technology with other vehicles that essentially is doing the same thing. And you don't even have to worry about swiping card. You just step in, walk away. And unfortunately, we're now finally just seeing not only just the implementation on the charger side, but also with more cars offering that. However, exactly your experience, kind of what you're talking about. I went through Wyoming about a year ago, and it was all kind of level 2, or not level 2, but the version 2 Tesla DC fast chargers. And it was fine, but there along the way there were a couple Electrify America. So I was like, you know what the hell? I'll just swing in there, see if it's a little bit quicker. And that was a terrible mistake because
yeah.
It took me I was just getting so spoiled because I'd done about on that trip I was doing about 800 miles a day, and so I just been spoiled about you just pull in, plug it in, and then I'd beeline it to the bathroom. And so here I kind of plug in. I already had the pass and everything in the app download.
You have to go to you think you want to go to the bathroom, but you have 25 minutes to turn the thing on. Yeah.
Right. And I'm like, okay, this will just work, just like pumping gas, and I'll.
Why wouldn't it work? Yeah.
No, another experience where it was not
totally insane to me. I mean, it's like, okay, like the Iona, I think it's called, the network that's coming, the joint venture, Hyundai and BMW and GM. But it's insane that it took this long, that these companies were so out to lunch. They're like, oh yeah, we'll just make people buy a $70,000 car, and I don't really know how they'll charge it. I've been saying this since 2013. The smartest thing Tesla did was the Supercharger network. I didn't really get that it would be so much better than other. I knew other charging solutions would come. The reason I thought it was so good was you had a bunch of people that had just bought $100,000 science experiments that all stood around in a circle for 45 minutes staring at each other going, hey, good job. Yeah. You're smart too. I'm smart. You're smart. We're smart. And it was like brand building. But I didn't realize I don't get how. Now again, I believe Electrify America has turned a corner, but I just couldn't believe how they could be so bad for so long. And EVgo has seemed to have taken up Electrify America's horrible old mantle. We're the worst, But that said, ChargePoint, I was at a place last night, 3 ChargePoint chargers, all broken with signs on them. We're broken, meaning they're just never getting fixed. But
and their whole the ChargePoint business model makes it so difficult for those to ever be replaced.
It'll never be replaced. And it's up to the landlord. The landlord's like, F that,
Exactly.
So, anyways, it's comical, but I think, like I said, Electrify America in particular has seemed to turn a corner. But one step forward, 2 steps back. Tesla, they fired all 500 people that work for the supercharger department. So it's like, what? And I was talking to people at GM who were like, there was no one for us to call. We wanted to call someone to get this going.
That whole the Tesla supercharger thing was a pretty wild.
You couldn't get a hold of anybody, and I know in Germany they're having board meetings. Should we be switching to NACS? What's the actual advantage besides ubiquity? It's slower. So it's still the first inning.
I don't know. I did a road trip in the UK using CCS chargers, and it wasn't too bad, but just the inherent, I think also going back to that example of trying to make the new technology easier for everyone, just having one plug that works for AC and DC and just the size of it makes it so much easier for accessibility and that stuff. I don't, whether it's they invest in Tesla supercharger network or not, I think just inherently that design will be a big plus for the end user experience, especially with of the
Betamax was a way better technology than VHS. Tesla had it. They fired everybody right at this critical point. They might have.
I mean, to be fair, they didn't fire everyone. They just fired the business development side.
No, they fired everybody who worked for Supercharger. Every single employee.
Not the actual people working or doing the live updating. That's what I've heard
No,
from
no,
people that
no,
were
no,
still
no, no,
there.
no.
That like
He fired
essentially,
everyone. He
and
fired.
it sounds like
No, he cleaned it. He hired some back, but I also heard that's going to be those are temporary hirebacks even because these were like whatever high management people that got hired back to like keep the lights on in the department, and they're like miserable.
interesting. Yeah,
It
because everyone
it's
I've talked to, it's been a little bit of they did hire, like he did let go like a lot of the people who were doing the site kind of development and that stuff. But
yeah.
as far as like the actual management and upkeep of the supercharger, that team was still there, that part of
No,
it. And
I
now
believe
they've
that's
slowly,
false. I heard it was everybody in Supercharger was broomed out, and everybody in new model development was broomed out. And it's just crazy. It's just I
for
just don't
sure,
get it. Yeah, it's just
for sure. I
it's
mean,
like,
yeah.
what you know. And again, you
I
don't
will.
have to
The other
switch.
thing that I did think was interesting, just to
Yeah,
kind of go with that thought, though,
yeah,
was they had actually announced a bunch of technologies. I mean, I do think a big part of it was just kind of like him firing the person because they didn't want to make the cutbacks as like what was being said. But there were also a lot. What was interesting was there were actually a lot of Tesla product announcements last year that we just never saw.
well,
And I do
that's
kind
how
of,
he does it. I mean, look, yeah.
well, no, no.
Yeah,
I mean, I mean, it's one thing to like to that's a fair point. Like the Cybertruck, all that stuff. Obviously, yeah, it took a while, and then they do deliver it. But there was like they alluded to a wireless charger. They alluded to like some new
sure.
charging technology. They alluded to other stuff, and then it just never got anywhere. And he probably was distracted with Twitter and everything else. But it does seem like there may have been a change, good or bad, with him kind of like coming in to get things for this next version. I hope that's the case, just because I like to see good competition. But we'll see. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean,
It's
but
definitely been an
again,
interesting few months with all of the kind of charging space, unfortunately.
yeah, no, but again, like you think about it right now. If you're every other OEM, well, hey, dude, we're already
Right.
doing CCS. Why are we switching? Like we don't have to switch. Like so. I just think it was
I mean,
just
that's
like
a fair point.
yeah, it's like hey, my car and CCS charges faster than NACS. Like sure,
Well,
there's a
under
potential.
the like the actual J3400 charges faster. That's the problem. Is none of those are actually in
Right.
implementation right now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. No, what I was saying, like I've seen. God, I had a Lucid that was charging at like something ridiculous. It was like over
Yeah.
300 kilowatts. It was flying. The thing was insane. Teslas can't do that. The NACS
Right.
that I've seen can't do that yet. It's possible, but where are they? So it's just this real self-inflicted gunshot wound of like, why would you do that now? And it's like, again, right now, the only vehicles that come with a native NACS port is a Tesla. Everyone else is still using CCS. And like, yeah,
True.
boy, it'd save us a lot of money if we just left it CCS. They really would. Customers, CCS customers, they don't care. Yes, sure, it'd be nice to have the access to the supercharger network, but guess what? I got an adapter. It works fine. So it's a weird time.
I think. I mean, for sure. I don't think there's an argument there. Good or bad, it's become weird times.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think it's. I'm kind of torn. I've used both and J1772,
Hmm.
and I do think that the one kind of plug that works for anything, whether it be AC or DC, is just a better user experience and just kind of simplifies a lot of things for people who are trying to make the
Again,
switch.
undoubtedly, but again,
Yeah.
Betamax was a better technology than
Hey, well, yeah,
VHS.
yeah, yeah. No, I mean, no argument there. We'll see what plays
The
out.
porn industry likes VHS, and
Yeah, yeah.
it's just it's where you're gonna sell the most, and like Tesla sales are down. Other EV sales are all up. There's a lot of CCS. Like maybe you don't switch. I already got a CCS at home. I don't really want to switch. So it's
Fair.
just weird. It's just a weird time.
Well, wait. So when you say you have the J1772, you mean the kind of AC charging for
At home, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's the same top plug. Doesn't have the 2-pin. I mean, I can go to a fast charger, use the 2-pin, but yeah.
No, and it is kind of interesting though, just looking at all the different infrastructure and stuff that's been out there. You kind of mentioned Lucid, and I think that their products from an engineering standpoint have been very impressive.
Oh,
But then
it's
kind of going
next
back
level.
to the software-defined vehicle side of stuff is where there's kind of been a big, at least in my experience, kind of letdown. And I think you've probably talked to the team more and probably obviously had more seat time than I have too. I'm just kind of curious if you like, obviously you have a Rivian for your day-to-day vehicle, but like looking at others kind of in the space, which have been not even necessarily startup, but like what have been the EVs that are kind of out there right now that you're the most excited about and interested in? I mean, for me, the
I
big one
mean,
right now is the new Porsche Taycan, but
yeah, I haven't experienced it yet. I'd love to.
yeah, same.
I think BMW's kind of smashing it right now. Now, where they're falling down is their software. It's
Yeah,
like it's a cluttered mess. Their central nav screens has actually surpassed Mercedes. Is like I don't know where anything is. Can't find
right.
it. Um, but I think BMW though, like man, the i5, the i7, the iX, solid, good products. They really are. Um, Lucid. I mean, the range just speaks for itself, and they did do like a pretty big software update that did fix a lot of it. It's still not good enough, and I think they know it's not good enough,
Yeah.
and I think they're really scrambling to get Gravity out the door. But like again, boy, when Gravity comes, I think Peter was saying there's some scenario where maybe it's going to get like 6 miles a kilowatt, which is like that's like my Rivian gets 2.
Right.
That's efficient. Um,
Yeah.
and they're starting to license their hardware, and yeah,
Right.
it's just unbeatable from that perspective. So yeah, their software it's always been the weak spot of the car. It's not the hardware. Um, but it's not like Fisker where they just didn't work at all. It's
That's
just
true.
yeah. I think Mercedes, the people that own them, they really enjoy them, and they actually are very solid EVs. Um, uh, some of the Audis are pretty good, some are pretty old, and so yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Taycan, and they just announced today the new e-tron GT and the RS e-tron GT, like ah, great looking things, and finally they're going to have some range, and a lot of power, so that's interesting. The one actually probably impressed me the most recently. I drove the Nissan Aria.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
like, damn, that's a
I
fine
saw some
little
of the videos you had posted about that.
yeah.
And I
It
do
does.
think like it almost just doesn't seem like a Nissan. And I don't mean that as it aesthetically and the interior wise, it's pretty different than a lot of the stuff that they've offered at least recently. And it's not a bad product. I think it's just too expensive right now compared to other things. But
Well,
it's
I
definitely
mean,
a really unique.
they have a wide range, and they have a front wheel drive version that's in the 40s, and it's kind of in line with like an Ioniq 5, or EV6 or whatever, and like it's pretty nice. Plus, they have these like banger, ludicrous lease deals that are happening.
Yeah.
And I was
I
impressed. I was just
admittedly I haven't looked at it too recently, so it may have
yeah,
been just kind of the first few versions when I look back
yeah.
there.
I mean, the one I had was definitely the whatever they called it, the
The
E-Force
fully
Plus
loaded, yeah.
Platinum Double Triple whatever. But I think it was like 55,000. But it was 400 horsepower. 0 to 60 was quoted at 4.8. Killer interior, drove terrific, wonderful ride, and I'm like, this is great. Like if you were to buy a $55,000 Murano or Pathfinder, like
Right.
ugh, just like CVT death,
Yeah.
just and this was just so much better. Um, so I was very impressed by that. And again, we keep dancing around the Koreans, but like, boy, are they up to something? And are they making nice products? Ioniq 5, EV6 are good. Ioniq 9 needs some suspension work. And again, they're not really true software defined vehicles yet. There's still a lot of like unreprogrammable buttons, which will
Yeah.
just limit their ability to update them and make them better. But they're
I mean, I think there's something to be
mostly
said
there.
for, yeah, I think there's something to be said for like, sometimes people complain about like Tesla and even to an extent Rivian about like being too touchscreen focused. And I don't have an issue with it, but I totally get that understanding and definitely people abuse it. But it is kind of funny when you look at a lot of the high end and Kia stuff where it is kind of almost the opposite, where it's like, yeah, there's probably a few of these buttons you guys could have gotten rid of.
And again, the it's only as good as the software programmer. So I'll give you
Right.
an example.
Right.
Um, So the Rivian, from day one of the big complaints that I made and we all made, as an owner, I don't really pay attention to it, but the complaints always made by reviewers is like, what's with these vents? Why do I have to go to the screen to position and point
Yeah.
the vents? Well, new update that's coming. So in the new truck, there's presets. So you know how you and your
Oh, that's
wife are
funny.
probably different sizes, and when you get in the car, you adjust the seat, right? Well, my wife hates cold air blowing on her face. I die in a car without cold air blowing on her face. And
Yeah.
when we get in the cars, it's a constant fight. Whoever's driving, moving the vents around. Presets. By the way, the presets loaded to your phone. So my setting would be cold vents in my face when I get in
Yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
car. And then she's in the passenger seat, put the vents somewhere where she likes them, opposite for when her phone is in the driver's seat.
Well, that's
Uh,
that's kind of interesting because it's been that way in the Teslas for a while, and it's totally tied to like whoever's profile, whoever's driving the car, and
yeah. And
but
look, and
but
look,
it but it's exactly what you're talking about. It's something that can
yeah.
be changed later with software defined. But
Yeah.
it reminds me of something I did want to ask you, and that is I have seen so many car reviewers kind of complain about stuff like that, and I think
Yeah.
that use case you're talking about is it makes sense where it's like when you got the car, that is annoying going between different drivers. But there's been so many kind of things with whether it's electric or not, but kind of going to the touchscreens too, where you have to kind of go in there once to change the where you prefer the air coming out. But then after, I mean, and maybe it's a little inconvenient, but once you've done that, I have not changed it in my car in like 2 years. And do you think that there is kind of an issue with traditional car reviewers being able to successfully go not only to electric vehicles, but I think with a lot of these vehicles, it's like you can't really get it in a 24-hour or even 48-hour thing. It's like you almost have to have it with a week. I mean, you can, but I think there's so many things I've seen about like negative reviews about cars. I was like, well, yeah, that would suck if it was like a rental car or you had to use it for a
Yeah.
day or two. But
I
if it's like
think,
your personal vehicle, then yeah, you never change this.
yeah, I think there will
And that's
always
just
be
one
some of
example.
that. There will always be some of
Yeah.
that. But I do think, and Kyle Connor made this point, and
Yeah, he's great. We had him on before.
yeah, Kyle's great. I never, he made this point, and he was very just, he has a very succinct way of speaking, but unless he's going on for 9 hours about a battery thermal state. But he just said most car reviewers don't understand EVs, and it really
Yeah.
stuck with me because I've been having fights with people where they're like, "Oh man, you know what I love about the Mach E? It's got an on-off switch." I'm like, "Why do you love that? Like,
Right.
what if your phone had an on-off switch? Like, how stupid would that be? Like, it's just what." The best thing in the world is you just sit in the car and it's ready to go.
Yeah.
This Nissan Aria, turn it on and it would take 5 seconds for the radio to wake up, and
The
you
same with the
just
Ford Lightning. Yeah, it takes like
yeah,
30
it's just like
seconds for that thing to boot
ooh, and
up.
you're just wasting your life away. Whereas Rivian, you just jump in and go. Tesla, you jump in and go. Lucid, you try to. Lucid's still
Yeah.
offensive.
Yeah.
They're getting better, but yeah.
Right,
Um,
right.
and but again, you read a lot of reviews and they talk about how it's hard to charge. It's like, well, it's hard to charge because you don't have a home charger. Like if you're
Yeah.
gonna buy the thing, you would have a home charger. How fast did it charge relative to other things in the segment once you got it plugged in? So I definitely agree. There's a lot of ignorance from my colleagues and myself too. I wish I knew more about electric
Well, no, and
vehicles.
I think that's what's been really interesting about even watching both of you guys on the InEVitable podcast. But it is very clear, like progressing through the episodes, you guys have such a deep knowledge of cars and the car industry, and especially like combustion vehicles.
Mhm.
But with electric vehicles, there's a lot of new things. And then just like these recent examples I was talking about, like vehicle to grid, like there's a whole new universe.
Yeah,
And
it's
it's
exciting.
it's one thing when I see like a journalist like say kilowatt instead of kilowatt hour, I'm like, oh, that's really
Sure.
annoying. But I am kind of curious, like, what has been the best way for you as a kind of traditional car journalist making this change into the EV space and learn these things? Like, what do you think the other writers or others need to do out there, or is it just like there just isn't an interest from them in doing that, maybe, or is it
Yeah,
just a lot
there's
to take on?
yeah, I mean there's some of that for sure.
Yeah,
But I think, too few uh car journalists buy new cars. Too few. Ed, my co-host, famously is like,
Yeah, yeah,
I'm cheap. I buy a used Cayenne, 2017 Cayenne. It's like, yeah, support your industry, man. Like I buy new cars. And so I think too few buy new cars, and then of the minority that does, too few are EVs. And
yeah,
I'm not saying you have to own an EV, but I think you really, if you're gonna, if you're gonna review cars for a living, get a home charger, because
for
that's
sure.
the experience that the owners have. Is I wake up when I want to with the full battery. I used to think I had to keep my battery charged. Now I'm like,
Right,
yeah, leave it at 20%. Who cares? I'll charge it when I need to. But again, like that's the owner experience. Especially as you learn more, and then again, once it's still a few years away from mainstream, but once bidirectional charging really gets going, it's like I'm leaving my battery freaking empty because maybe someone's going to want to pay me to put electricity into it for a few minutes.
yeah.
Um, it's rapidly changing. But
It's
anyways,
well,
yeah,
and it is kind of a. I mean, it's a area that I'm really fascinated with, and has had a lot of discussions, especially as someone kind of like who worked in the renewable space about starting like a decade ago. However, I think in some ways, I think we're finally starting to see some of the VDG stuff that's been talked about for the last 5 years.
yeah,
But I think part of the problem was, like obviously Tesla kind of was one of the first one's not necessarily to come out with VDG, but obviously battery backup and stuff they offered at home. And that started like getting a lot of gears turning, and more so kind of like Wall Street would say like, oh, this is the future. We're going to give them a bunch of money. Uh, Probably not the right thing, but give them a bunch of money. And then that's where like GM and these others, and I totally get it. I think it makes sense for a lot of these companies to make inroads into that and make that investment. But it does seem like there were a large rush to get into that space. And good or bad, we're finally starting to see some of that. But I think the inherent challenge is just like how expensive it is to install these, unfortunately, in homes. Like in our example, our house is in the 70s and we need to do a panel upgrade anyway. So that's one thing. But I think that's kind of the trouble with it is like the vast majority of people don't understand that that is part of the expense. And like, that's at least anywhere from 6 to 8 grand,
oh yeah, we
unfortunately, to
do a
get
panel
done.
upgrade. Yeah, and then if you GM's doing a smart thing with their GM Energy thing, where it's like, hey, we'll give you bidirectional charging for $7,500. By the way, we'll just take your federal tax credit and do it for free. It's like it happens to be
Yeah.
7,500. So it's smart. But yeah, no, look, that's the other problem with EVs. It's a rich man's game at the moment. And there are going to be cheap EVs coming. But that's like all new technologies. It's
Yeah.
not all, but but it's going to take time. But eventually, I mean, the electric automobile will happen, and people will start to see the benefit of of spending the money. It's like solar panels too. It's like no one ever is like, man, that was a waste of money. It's like, oh, I'm really glad I did that. It was, yeah, it
Yeah.
cost a little bit, but it's a good thing. And so yeah, it just takes time. And look, like any other market, prices will drop, everything will become cheaper. But yeah, but again,
No,
like
and I mean, it for sure already has.
yes,
I think that
yeah,
what's just so interesting about this is it's a whole new market that is very utility dependent. So you have automakers who have really never had to work with utilities, have to deal with DC fast charging, and then residential charging, which are themselves their own beasts. And then
mhm.
in addition to that, you have to have a really good software stack to communicate between all of these things.
That
Which
that,
I once again I completely agree with you. I think the cost will come down, and I think we will get there. But
mhm.
I think that I think we're on like generation one or like the
First
still like
inning,
alpha
baby,
prototype.
first inning,
Yeah, yeah,
first.
exactly. This I think in the vehicle to grid space, we might be
Oh,
doing the national
connection
anthem.
hell.
I don't even know if the game has started. There's still a little bit of a ways to go. But I'm sorry. What else were you going to say there?
It's just we're early, and like all things, it'll improve.
You know, one of the things I did want to talk to you about though was you just bought a new car that
I
wasn't
did,
an EV,
I did. I bought a Toyota
and
Corolla. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think that's really interesting to me, and that's kind of like almost how we personally are too. We have an EV that is like 90% of our day to day stuff, and it's kind of the fun like road trip thing. But then we have like a fun weekend vehicle, which is our old Land Rover Defender. And I'm kind of curious, like when you look at the traditional car enthusiast space, do you see this as kind of the future? of like, yeah, most people are just going to have an EV as a daily, and then we'll still have like a combustion vehicle for the weekends? Or how do you think that kind of plays in? And is that a way maybe to get people to buy into the idea of EVs who, especially kind of in the car community, have been pretty, those that have been adamant against it?
Yeah. I mean, my purchase was more like I the wheels were kind of in motion. Like, and I like to have
Gotcha.
like a little sports car. I got a kid. I don't know if a kid needs to go in it, but it's got a back seat. And like, yeah, the Ioniq 5N, but it was like 70 grand versus I
Yeah.
paid like 46. Could I have swung it? Yeah, probably, but 46,000 was a good price point for me. Especially because I'm still paying off the stupid Rivian, which is a lot more. It's just there really weren't
Well, it
any
handles a
others.
lot differently too. Yeah.
Yeah, there just weren't any other sporty EV options at the moment. In a few years, I guarantee there will be. You know what I mean? So it was just sort of like
Right.
I like interesting cars. I like fun to drive cars. Um, like I had an Alpha
Fair.
Giulia, and like yeah, I probably should have got the Quadrifoglio because the Giulia was cool. I didn't really want to drive it ever because it was kind of a nothing engine. For
Yeah.
me, for a lot of people, they really like it. It was just like, yeah, I would have.
It was a beautiful car for sure.
Great
But
car.
that's
Yeah,
kind of an
great car.
interesting take on it.
But
I've definitely heard a couple other people
so
share that too.
is this the last new gasoline car I'll probably ever buy? Yeah, last manual, kind of probably definitely. Um, but yeah, I bought it. I enjoy it. That said, it has like less than 400 miles on it. I gotta drive. I never drive the thing, so it's just sort of when I don't have a press car, I need another car that
Right.
is, So I do love it. I do love it. I mean, I drove it a little yesterday, and I'm like, God, this thing is so good. It's just a great to drive vehicle.
So, I mean, is it just those two vehicles you have right now? And did you kind of get that one?
I technically own a Porsche 914, but it's
Okay.
that's a whole other episode. So one day
Fair,
it might
fair.
show up. Yeah, it's being restored supposedly. So
Now, those are pretty popular for electric conversions. Is that something you'd ever do, or do you see that as blasphemy?
definitely not blasphemy.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about getting it from where it's living right now and giving it to a friend and just getting an EV out of it. Yeah, I'm thinking about that. So, but no, I don't see it as particular. I mean, it's a 1970 like 914. Like, oh no, the 80
Right.
horsepower 1.7 liter. Like, oh, what a precious thing. It was a commodity car that happened to be a mid-engine two-seater.
I mean, to be honest with you, that's why I've kind of been open to it. It's like there's so many beautiful cars that just had terrible powertrains. Now, for that, it kind of works because it was so small and light anyway. But that is kind of where I do think like converting some of these old ones is kind of cool. Like if it didn't have some amazing V8 or something else, like it keeps it on the road, which is good for the environment.
Yeah.
And for a lot of people who may have like a sentimental connection or got from someone else in the family, it's less maintenance and just kind of a great option for them.
No, I think it's fine. I think my problem with most EV conversions is that they're level 2 conversions, so you can't fast charge them. So they're just kind of like around town toys.
So you would want a road trip one?
I don't know. It just give you the option. It's just they're not fully there. It's just like again, I do like an EV powertrain, but I think what I'm learning, I really like software defined vehicles. I really like
right.
wild innovation. But again, if electrifying it adds to the driving experience, great. If it doesn't, keep it gas. Who cares?
For sure.
But I don't really. To be really honest, I don't really think about it. I don't care what you do with your own car. It's your car. Do what you want. It's the new ones that I'm worried about.
So kind of with that, I realize we're kind of coming on the end of our time. I just want to say, one, thanks again for coming on. This has been great today.
Oh,
and,
totally.
Fun conversation. A lot of different parts of the EV space right now. What you've mentioned software defined vehicles, and that's something you talk about a lot. But is there anything that we haven't discussed today that you really do enjoy about electric vehicles that kind of like stands out, or has been something that you just didn't expect to enjoy as much?
Yeah, I was talking to some I drove the Macan EV, a prototype, and I was talking with the Porsche guys, and I said, you're German engineers. You must have a word for, yes, you're adding weight, but at the same time, the center of gravity is lowering, and that improves performance by blah amount. They go, oh yes, it's the Waffenpfaffen or whatever they say. And so and again, maybe the Aria kind of, we did cover it a little bit, but like just going EV. If you think about the Nissan Murano, like mediocre is a mean term, but a middling vehicle, middle of the pack.
Yeah.
Well, just going electric, wow, suddenly it's just great to drive. The ride quality was insane. It feels luxurious. It's quiet, it's smooth. There's no horrid CVT or whatever bad transmission solution that economy cars get, or mainstream cars get tasked with. You really have this like, instantly torquey thing. So it's like, just like RAV4s and everything going electric, like I said, like the Prius, man, if that was a full EV, it'd be a fantastic vehicle. So just like your average car is going to get so much better.
It's funny you say that, because one of the things we talked about in our previous episode was about like the challenges that a lot of these older brands, like especially the Germans, of like kind of around the badge engineering. When you have the new Macan and then there's the Audi equivalent on it, like their big thing was like, well, we flip the motor around too, so that kind of gives you more of the traditional Porsche feeling of that. And I haven't driven either, so I can't say for sure one or the other. But do you think that is something that a lot of these kind of brands are struggling with, or anything that to kind of make that change to like to differentiate more, since so many of them have kind of gone to the skateboard low gravity design across brands?
I would say, I've driven both of them. I can't talk about the Audi yet.
Okay.
But I would say you look at the Volkswagen Group and you look at, let's say, it's the MLB Evo platform. Okay, well, what's that? Well, Audi A4 is MLB Evo 2, and so is the Lamborghini Urus.
Right.
These guys are good at differentiating a common platform. They're really good at it. So I'm not worried about that at all. Turning the motor around, I mean, that's some marketing horseshit. But they did do an excellent job making the new Macan EV drive and feel just like you're driving. I would say even less a Macan, but like a Cayenne. It really does feel like a Porsche SUV. Very, oh wow, So they did a very good job at that, and it makes more power and it's quieter and drives better. All the good EV stuff. So no, I'm not worried about that at all. These guys are the master of that. I worry
because I think one of the other examples we talked about was how phenomenal of a job Kia and Hyundai have kind of hopped on the wave of the electric cars, because no one ever talked about the roar of a Kia, and now you have fun Kias to drive.
And again, what was even like a Genesis, like what sucked about Genesis is with the powertrain. Well, make them all electric, great. But yeah, no, I mean, I think maybe I worry about like when autonomy becomes more of a thing. Well, how is the Volkswagen
for sure
autonomous software is it gonna drive like a Volkswagen, or is the Porsche gonna drive like a Porsche? Who knows? We'll see. But I think as far as like differentiating, you can totally do it. And I mean, you even see it with. I can't talk about this Audi, but anyways, you can do a lot with software. Where
that's good. That's good to know.
Radically change a vehicle with just software. You know what I mean? I mean, I'll put it like this: the Q6 and the SQ6, which have very different power outputs, same hardware. It's just a software. Software says pull more power out of the battery, spin the motors faster with this much throttle input. That makes it a SQ6. So.
Well, I think that's about as good of a place to end it on today, Jonny. Thank you so much. That's been a great conversation, and we'll have to have you get on soon. That wraps up this episode of the Grid Connections podcast. We hope you enjoyed our conversation with Jonny Lieberman, where we delved into the transition to electric vehicles, the current state of EV charging, and the fascinating world of software-defined vehicles. If you found this episode valuable, please share it with at least one other listener who would enjoy it as well. And don't forget to leave a positive review on our podcast page. Your feedback and support helps us continue to bring you the best in EV news and insights. Thanks for tuning in, and until next week, this is the Grid Connections podcast, signing off.